Okay, so in this video here, we're going to be talking about solving absolute value equations. So let's get right into it. Now, the first thing that you have to understand here is that absolute value is the distance from zero. You may or may not have known that, okay? But just a quick review here, it is going to be the distance from zero, okay? So in other words, a distance cannot be negative. So when you take the absolute value of a number, what you're essentially doing is you're finding the distance that number is from zero. And it will always be positive. So absolute value can never be negative. But technically, there's two variations. So for example, if you look down here, -5. Well, the absolute value of -5 is going to be +5 because -5 to 0 is a distance of +5. Okay? And you could do the same thing here. If I start at +5, well, the distance from 5 to 0 is going to be +5. All right, so that's kind of a key takeaway you have to remember. There's two different variations when you're dealing with absolute value. You have to the left of 0 and you have to the right of 0, or in other words, the negative numbers and the positive numbers, okay? So that will definitely help you if you can remember that while we're doing these absolute value equations. So let's go ahead and take a look at our first example. So here's our first example, and this is what you need to remember. Whenever you're solving an absolute value equation, you have to isolate the absolute value. Now in this equation here, it's already isolated. This whole part is isolated. That's what we want. But if you had another term over here, you would have to get rid of that first before doing what we're about to do, okay? So in this example here, the absolute value is already isolated. We're good to go. So from here, remember what absolute value is. It is the distance from 0. And we talked about it, there's two different variations. Remember, we can be going from the left of 0 or to the right of 0. Or in other words, the negative numbers and the positive numbers. So as a result, we're actually going to have two different answers here when we solve for an absolute value equation. And here's how it's going to work. First, you're going to write everything like you see, and you're just going to drop the absolute value bars. So for example, my first equation is going to be b over 10 equal to 5. All I'm doing is dropping the absolute value bars, okay? That's equation 1. Now equation 2, we have to rewrite it, but this time we're going to change all of the signs on the right-hand side of the equal sign. And remember, we're doing that because we need to take into account the other possibility, okay? So what we're going to say here is b over 10 equal to -5. By doing this, again, I'm going to be solving for both of those variations that could occur. So we're going to solve our first equation, and then we're going to solve our second equation, and we're going to end up with two different solutions here. And that's what happens when you solve an equation dealing with absolute value. All right, so the first equation, I have to multiply both sides by 10, right? That will cancel here. Do the same thing here. I get b is equal to 50. 5 times 10. Here, again, same thing. I'm going to multiply both sides by 10. Okay, this will cancel, cancel. I get b is equal to -50. Okay, so this is done. That's my solution, and that is my solution. Okay, so again, the key takeaway here, make sure you isolate the absolute value before writing out your two different equations. Okay, let's try the next example. So here's our next example, and ask yourself, is the absolute value isolated? And it's not. Remember, I want this part alone. So before I can write out those two different equations, I actually have to get rid of this 3. To do that, I'm going to multiply both sides by 3. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. This will cancel. And I'm going to end up with the absolute value of 10x is equal to 9. Now I'm good to go. It's isolated. I can write out my two different equations. So I'll have here 10x equal to 9. And then the other one is going to be 10x. And again, we're changing all the signs on the opposite side of the equal sign. So here we're going to have equal to -9. Okay? And now all we have to do is solve. So I'm going to divide by 10 here. Okay? Divide by 10 here. And we have two different answers now. So we're going to have x is going to be equal to, I can write it all as 1 though, because 9 over 10 and -9 over 10, they're both the same number, so I can write it as plus or minus right? 9 over 10, okay? So I'm pretty much including those two solutions in one, okay? So there's my final answer. All right, let's go ahead and try another example. Okay, so here's our next example. And again, I want to isolate this part here. So my first step, I'm going to have to add 7 on both sides. This will cancel. So now I have the absolute value of x minus 4 equal to negative 2 plus 7. That is going to give me positive 5. And so now I have the absolute value bars isolated. I can go ahead and write my two different equations. I'm going to have x minus 4 equal to 5. And then I'll have x minus 4 equal to negative 5. And then solving both of them, I'll get plus 4 here. This will give me x is equal to 9. Okay, so there's one of them. Add 4 here. And we get x is equal to negative 1. So there we go. Done. So I get 9 and negative 1 here. All right, let's try 2 more examples. So this one looks a little more challenging, but it's really not. We just have a couple more steps before we can write out these two different equations. So my first step here is to get rid of this positive 10. So I'm going to minus 10 on both sides. This will cancel. So now I have 6 times the absolute value of negative 1 minus 4b, closing that absolute value, equal to 90. From here, I'm going to have to divide both sides by 6. When I do that, the right side is going to be equal to 15. 90 divided by 6 will give me 15. Okay? So I end up with this whole part here. The absolute value of negative 1 minus 4b equal to 15. Okay, so now I'm ready to go. I have this whole part isolated. I can go ahead and write my two different equations. I get negative 1 minus 4b equal to 15. And then the other one's going to be negative 1 minus 4b equal to negative 15. Okay? So here I'm going to add 1 and then divide by negative 4, right? That's what's going to end up happening. So just simplifying this down real quick, I get negative 4b equal to positive 16. So I can see here I'm going to divide both sides by negative 4. I get b is equal to negative 4. 16 divided by negative 4 is negative 4, right? So b is equal to negative 4. So that one's solved, okay? This one here, again, I'm going to have to take this negative 1, move it over, so I have to add 1. That leaves me with negative 4b equal to negative 15 plus 1. That gives me negative 14, okay? My last step, divide both sides by negative 4. Now, I'm going to end up dividing by two negatives here, meaning it's going to end up being positive. I'll end up with b equal to 14 all over 4, and we can reduce that. We know that 2 can go into 14 7 times, and 2 can go into 4 2 times. So my final answer in reduced form is going to be b is equal to 7 over 2. Okay, done. So that one was a little bit longer, but again, same idea applies here. We have to isolate the absolute value first, and then we can write out our two different equations. All right, let's try our last problem. So here's our last problem, very similar to the other one. Our first step here, we're going to add 10. So let's go ahead and do that, adding 10. And this will cancel. So now I have 14 times the absolute value of 20 minus 2x equal to 46 plus 10 will give me 56. So now I have to divide both sides by 14, right? And then we'll be ready to go. So this will cancel. Divide by 14 here. So 56 divided by 14, that is going to give you 4. So we're going to be left with the absolute value of 20 minus 2x equal to, and we said 56 divided by 14 will give you 4. So now my absolute value is isolated. I can write my two different equations, and I can go ahead and just go for it. And so this one I'm going to do in a different color, so hopefully it's easy to differentiate between what we're doing here. So we're going to have 20 minus 2x equal to 4. There's the first one. And now I'm going to have 20 minus 2x equal to a negative 4. Okay? So again, solving this one, we're going to have to minus 20 on both sides. And then we're going to have to divide by a negative 2, right? So this will cancel. I'll get negative 2x equal to 4 minus 20. That's going to give me negative 16. And so again, divide both sides by negative 2 now. You get x is equal to negative 16 divided by negative 2. You get positive 8. X will be equal to 8. Okay, so that one's done. This one here, we're going to minus 20. Minus 20. Okay, I get negative 2x equal to negative 24. Okay, our last step, again, we're going to divide both sides by negative 2. So x is going to be equal to negative 24 divided by negative 2. Well, again, I'm dividing two negatives. It becomes a positive, and it's going to end up being positive 12, right? Negative 24 divided by negative 2, positive 12. All right, so that's done. Okay, so that is solving equations with absolute value. It is a little bit different. You just have to remember that you have to isolate the absolute value first before writing out your two different equations. If you do that, you should get these right every single time. So if you gained something from this video, or if it helped you, if you could just go ahead and give the video a thumbs up, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you get more math videos in the future, and I'll see you in the next one.